tell people a little bit about who Svankmajer is and why he is important, and maybe about your relationship with him.
Well, I think Svankmajer is a very unique filmmaker or an artist, because he doesn't just make films. He believes in universal creativity. So in some way, whether it's a sculpture or a collage or a film, to him it doesn't matter. And he's developed a very unique language, which actually is following the tradition of surrealism. So it's not, in that sense, he's very much part of a movement which actually is also very much alive, according to him. And so there's actually a group in Prague, a surrealist group, which regularly meets, and Svankmajer is a member of this group, very active member. They also publish a magazine called Analogon, which is very interesting mixture of psychoanalysis, surrealism, anthropology, and various sciences. And Svankmajer used to be I think he started in puppet theater, marionettes. He worked with marionettes, and then he became an animator. So he was interested in bringing life to objects. So his philosophy is basically based on this idea that we don't tell stories through objects, but we actually listen to objects and then tell their stories. And he also has been very interested in tactility, so in our sense of touch, and how that can actually be communicated through his films. Because in the 80s he was banned from filmmaking, and for 7 years he was only making sculptures, and he worked with ceramics a lot, and he really experimented with touch, and that then fed into his practice, into his film practice. So there's still an evidence of his tactile experiments in all his films, because they give a real visceral sense of the body. So that's one thing. And then the other very, very crucial element in his work is, which follows the tradition of the surrealist, is the role of imagination, which is to him a kind of expression of freedom. So basically this idea that one should never give their creativity to anything but freedom. So a lot of his films are also about the question of creative freedom.
Have you ever thought about the kind of objections people have to surrealism? And do you have any thoughts about them? Because there's a lot of people who I don't agree with, who think that it's somehow superficial, it's somehow about surfaces, it's somehow a sort of evasion of life, or it's somehow work that tells you more about you than it does about itself. And people say that about not just Svankmajer, they say that about Buñuel, and they say that about the sculptors and some surrealistic painters. Like, why is the surrealism any good here and now for us? Like, why is it not just a superficial fad in the art scene?
Well, I think the kind of serious surrealism.
Maybe like personally, yeah. Like, why is it important?
I think because it connects with these primal kind of basic urges, almost primitive urges in human beings. And I think that the idea of it is that actually we shouldn't and we can't repress them. So that's why also it came at the same time as psychoanalysis came, because it's about accessing your unconscious. So a lot of the techniques work with accessing, so like automatic writing, which actually Svankmajer used in his latest dystopian novel, where sections of it are automatic writing, but it's not, it's far from nonsense. It actually brings a lot of interesting content. So I think the problem with surrealism is that it's been hijacked a lot by advertising, where actually that element has been taken as the surface, and it lost that connection to this kind of primitive nature of human beings. So that's something I do really personally connect with, even though my work, I'm not a surrealist. I would never call myself that. But I've
a little bit.
Well, maybe by the fact that I'm from a country that somehow has that in its spirit, I think. But having read a lot about surrealism, yeah, I realized that it's quite, in some way, like Svankmajer calls himself a militant surrealist. So he is quite militant.
You know, I don't think nonsense is a bad word.
Mm-hmm.
I think nonsense is very, very, very important and profound, you know, as profound as sense. I mean, depending what you're doing, not if you're fixing your refrigerator, but, although maybe there too. but I think nonsense is something without which I couldn't make sense either of what's going on in my head or of, you know, what's going on in the world if I truthfully looked out at it. I mean, it's just that with somebody like Svankmajer, the nonsense is so rigorously organized with such a sense of control and such a clarity of vision, especially in his best work about what he wants to do. But right? I mean, do you think that's fair? That nonsense doesn't need to be a bad word?
Yes, no, definitely, I agree. I think it's this idea of like what's irrational somehow actually also has things to say to us. So, and also humor. I think that's like that kind of nonsense is connected with humor, and humor is incredibly important. And there's a lot of humor in his work, in Svankmajer's work, a lot of humor in his dystopian novel. I'm trying to remember the things he said. I forgot which philosopher, but he had this like a vision of him going to toilet in the forest. It was just very like complete nonsense, but incredibly funny as well.
I meet very few people who like surrealism and psychoanalysis at the same time. And probably the writer, or the philosophical writer on psychoanalysis who I'm most in love with, Richard Wollheim, was skeptical of surrealism. But I love both, and a lot of why I love both is actually a set of reasons that overlap. And one of the things that a good, so I mean, I had the most amazing psychoanalytic process for what, 5, 6, 7 years with an amazing man who's dead now. And that involves a lot of play, but also a lot of freedom and liberation. And some of that is what one feels in the best surrealistic works. I mean, if you go to, let's say, Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou, which is in the late 20s, and it's a film people should watch if they haven't, right? It's just a 15-minute film with 2 very famous images that Dali and Buñuel concocted. One's about ants running all over the palm of one's hand, and the other about an eyeball being cut open with a razor. And they're both images from dreams that they had and the images they chose because they were convinced they couldn't make any sense of them. And it's the most wonderful feeling of liberation for a modern human being, watching that, almost like some things that have been kind of blocked or locked kind of open through, and there's a kind of oxygenation of the corridors inside. So let's say a little bit about how these influences from Tarkovsky, from Svankmajer have appeared in your work. Can you capture that at all?
Well, Svankmajer, I think the most in terms of this focus on the body. So this idea of the tactility and kind of trying to show the sense of touch through image. So whether it's like he's very good. Svankmajer is very good at rhythm. He's got a very good rhythm in the editing, and also the use of sound, which I haven't actually worked as much with, even though I'm trying to develop this collaboration with an ASMR artist who is going to create a soundtrack. But I think some of his soundtracks are a little bit like ASMR. They actually give you this sense of, like a tactile sensation. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, my work is very different from Svankmajer. So in that sense, I would never compare myself, but I have taken, for example, one of the themes in his work is food. He works a lot with food because of his own reasons. I've kind of come to it partly because of him, but partly because food's very multisensory, and I've been interested in exploring that multisensory aspect of food. But yeah, I've definitely taken some of the structure of his idea of like a dinner between two people, which somehow is transformed through imagination into something else. So that's definitely one of my themes.
And is there something that people can watch to get a taste of what you do with this?
Yeah, I've got definitely one online, which is called Dinner for Deep Surface Divers. That's also on my Vimeo. And possibly also another one called Ophelia's Last Supper. I'm not sure actually if that's password protected or not. And I've just finished.
Yeah. And has no, go on. You finish your sentence.
You know, I've just finished another one which has been inspired by the lockdown, London lockdown, which is a self-isolation dinner, a dinner between a woman trapped inside a screen and a man in the real world.
And has Svankmajer seen your films?
Unfortunately, he hasn't. I had a screening in Prague, Svietozor, which is this cinema, quite famous cinema in the center of Prague, and I invited him, and he actually emailed me back. He didn't come, but he was genuinely trying to come, but he was too tired because he was just finishing his last feature film. So that was kind of very nice for me to know that he really wanted to come, but also terrifying. I have to say, if he was in the audience, I'd be really scared.
He's harsh, is he?
Well,
his critique of his colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would probably be polite, but yeah, I mean, he also is incredibly strong. So he refused. I don't know. He was given some kind of reward by the Czech, I don't know, prime minister or something, and he refused it. So he's quite what's the word? He's my brain's not working anymore.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about because part of the reason I wanted to chat with you is to exculpate any wisdom you have about Tarkovsky. So talk to me a little about what Tarkovsky means to you. Doesn't have to be how he's influenced your work, although that's interesting to me too. What because so much is said about Tarkovsky, he's almost a kind of sort of symbol, often associated with some things that should be associated with him, but often things that shouldn't be associated with him. What's he about for you?
So Tarkovsky was, I came across his work first time when I was a BA student. And I remember the first film that I saw at the BFI was Stalker. So I was like a 21-year-old student, didn't know anything about him, watched Stalker. I still have this memory of sitting through the sequence of the rail cart going between the normal world and the zone.
Yeah, yeah.
And thinking, oh my God, this is so long, because Tarkovsky is very famous for his incredibly long, lingering shots. And so I remember sort of sitting through it slightly painfully. Well, anyway, then the film finished, and only afterwards I thought to myself, like, wow, now I understand this idea of what it means to put work into something and how much it rewards you back. So that was like an opening of my eyes. Not that I've never seen films similar, but nothing quite like that. This was quite extreme kind of depth that actually that can only work through time somehow. So obviously that then later when I was writing my essay about him, and I was reading at the time his book Sculpting in Time. So unfortunately I don't remember the details of it anymore, but I still remember his idea of working with time, which was something that really kind of came across. And another thing that really struck me, and still I remember from the book, I think, is I think it was The Mirror, where one of the first scene, I think, is where the character is sitting or standing by a fence of this country house in the middle of fields. And if I'm not wrong, it's the location of somewhere he grew up, or he had a very personal connection with that place. And his idea was that if you film a place that's personally very meaningful to you, it's going to come across to the audience, even if they actually don't know that. So that there was some kind of link between this sort of authenticity of his own experience and the experience of the audience. So that's something that actually that stuck with me, and I think it is something that feeds into my own work. And so yeah, what I'm saying, all of these things about Tarkovsky's work, for me, I'm talking very subjectively. It's like it's a deeply subjective connection I've got with his work.
What's the film of his that means the most to you? He's made 7, right?
Yeah.
8, 7.
7, and I've seen 6. I never saw Nostalgia. I never saw that one. Because I thought to myself, well, I'll watch it when it's in cinema. I don't want to watch it on the screen, on the small screen.
I'm getting more wine, but I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, Stalker is one of them, but maybe, to be honest, I think the one I've watched the most most often is Solaris, and I think probably because I watched it more often, I got more of a connection with it. But it's also like tapped into something in me that I really connect with, which is this idea of kind of like a nostalgia for planet Earth, or for being somehow being. I mean, I think in some way, obviously, his films are all about the same thing, or about the same similar kind of underlying themes that trickle through. And actually, it was this. I recently rewatched it again because I was starting to write something towards my book, and I started rewatching the last scene of Solaris, starting in the spaceship with the shot of a little plant on the window. And I think maybe it was the first time I was much more consciously sort of analyzing it. But that was interesting. So it had so much emotion in that little plant, where we know that it's so far away from the earth, from all that the characters hold dear. And then we follow the next shot is of Calvin on the earth, or what we think is the earth, and he's watching this lake, and then he comes towards the house where he sees, and again I'm not sure whether it's his father or I think it's his father, and he's sort of watching him through the window. But already there's this sense of sadness because we already feel that actually it's not real. It's a memory, or it's some kind of hallucination created by Solaris. And then he sees this boiling water pouring over him, and so we know that it's not real. And there's so much emotion in that, of this sense of loss, and then actually only in this last moment when I watched it, after so many times watching it, I've noticed that when the father leaves the house, he actually doesn't move the door. So he sneaks through the door that's already open, which to me really explains the fact that he's not physically embodied being. He's a projection of the character's mind, or the hallucination of the Solaris. But anyway, so I think for me, this is all about this idea of what it means to be alive, and almost sort of dreaming of being alive from a place where we not, which then reinforces that sense of being alive even more. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. You know, my relationship with music means that I find it very significant that some of the composers I love the most are perfect and some aren't and can't be. And some of the filmmakers I admire the most are perfect, and some of the filmmakers I admire the most are imperfect. And one filmmaker I regard as perfect is Buñuel. And a filmmaker I love very, very much, who I find imperfect, is Tarkovsky. And it's absolutely not to do with imperfection at the level of control. I mean, there's a degree of kind of architectonic completeness to the control that he has that I think also Bergman had at his best. of the filmmakers from the last 50, 75 years. These two, for me, have the most extraordinary control, which can be linked with our idea of musical process, because everything is integrated, just like everything is so integrated in Bergman's Cries and Whispers, which I think is the most musical film ever made. But while Bergman focuses in on your face, and via that on what's inside you, with a kind of application of cold heat and attention, and that he requires the greatest physiognomic acting to make it possible. When Tarkovsky presses his attention on something, what he yields isn't what's going on inside you. What he yields is a kind of cosmic weight of something, or our subjective sense of the cosmic weight of something. And of course, what he's trying to give us there is something we have lost. And my sense of his greatness, but also my suspicions of him, are to do with the way he gives us the things that we have lost. Because some of the things we have lost because we're suspicious of them. And that's a Werner Herzog style of thought, actually, in a way. But nothing happens in Tarkovsky that doesn't have some kind of a sense of cosmic reverberation. Like not the flicker of an eyelid, like nothing. Not a glass moving on the table, nothing. And the quality of the work is so extraordinary that it's not a suspicion it's going to make me go away from the work. But I feel it. And it also connects, I think, to what you're talking about when you talk about loss. Mm-hmm. Because we have either lost or gone in the mode of telling subjective stories about the cosmic significance things have, the significant things have beyond human purposes. And in the most extraordinarily intense way, Tarkovsky tries to yield this power of cosmic significance that objects might take on if you're a genius and you focus the camera really properly, really properly on that. And I'm very grateful for it, but I'm also suspicious.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, yeah, my relationship with him is much more subjective and personal, and I think emotional. And I think obviously it resonates, something in his vision resonates with my own vision of the world. So I've sort of
I know,
recognized something in his work.
Yeah.
That feels
yeah.
both comforting and also I don't know, makes me feel more alive.
There's a slightly unhealthy, sickly quality to his type of perception, like almost a slightly radioactive quality. Mm-hmm. Like when you focus on something sufficiently deeply, it begins to kind of transform. It begins to kind of fizzle with a kind of radioactive energy and there's a certain kind of unhealthiness about it. That I mean in a good sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's something sickly about the order of the universe, like almost if you pull the carpet up a little bit that we don't pull up, but if you pulled up, it would be something a little bit alien, a little bit.
Which I suppose,
and it's not a Solaris point, it's an everything point. I think I see that everywhere in all the 7 films.
Yeah, and if I think of Stoker, I suppose it also has this primitive aspects of when we talk about Svankmajer, this, just thinking of that shot towards the end of Stoker with the glass shaking, where we don't quite know whether it's shaking because something's passing, the train's passing, or whether it's the child. So, yeah.
Now, of course, it's not possible to end a conversation like this without mentioning the third influence on you, which is Werner. And yes, so we will not let this conversation go without mentioning him a little bit. He is and what's amazing about Werner in terms of some of the things we've said is that he believes in psychoanalysis but thinks it's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And he exaggerates it. He doesn't quite mean what he says, but he of course likes to repeat that psychoanalysis is the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. But for him, it's because it's true.
Uh-huh.
For him, it's because you are actually turning on the light in every room in the house.
Which he doesn't want.
No. But at the same time, also Werner is much more casual than the other two, and much less of a perfectionist as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot more in Werner's shots that's a little arbitrary, whereas with Tarkovsky, with Svankmajer, with Bergman, there's a sort of a control that I think at their best yields the right results. I'm tempted to say that might mean that Werner is a little behind Tarkovsky and Bergman, certainly. But what's he brought for you beyond just being probably the person who is best of the living filmmakers?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you might think Svankmajer is that.
No, I mean, I think actually one of the things he did bring is this thing that you just mentioned, this kind of more ease. So there's a kind of maybe more accessibility because of it, because it's not so perfect and not so intimidating in that sense. Yet there's a depth to it, which I think that's like on a kind of professional level, the form, the if I'm thinking of some of his more documentary style, so I think that kind of form that he created is something that I really like, which is kind of subjective documentary. I actually haven't seen any of his work for a long time, but actually one of the ones that I often think back to is the one about the ski jumper. I forgot the name of it. The wood carver.
The ecstasy of the wood carver Steiner.
Yes. I think that one was incredible.
And incredible because he worked under such a tight remit. I mean, it was a German channel that forced him against his will to appear on camera in the guise of a reporter, and he still made it out with a poem, with a 50-minute poem about flight.
Yes.
So the last film of yours I saw in the Whitechapel cinema, and that was a film about the local area you live in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be available for people to check out on the internet?
Not at the moment, because I'm still hoping to show it in galleries. And
gonna have to wait till 2029 for the physical screenings.
There's a trailer available, and actually there's an exhibition coming up in November again, if things go.
in London.
In London, in the Willesden Gallery. So it's a local gallery.
I didn't let you speak about Herzog. Just quickly, do you want to say something about how you've said something about how the combination of depth with relaxation has made an impression on you, but do you want to say something else about his meaning for your work?
I'm trying to think of all the films he's made, because obviously I've seen quite a few, and he made lots of them.
I don't know how many. I reckon maybe 80 now.
Yeah. So yeah,
about 80.
Some of them are more classic, but even I'm thinking of the one about the death row.
Oh yes.
Which I've been showing to my students. That one sequence for the squirrel sequence. Where this sort of genius of actually, I think engaging is. I think that's also what it is. It's about telling stories of people, which he tells so brilliantly, because he somehow has this incredible talent of getting them out of people. And this sequence with the squirrel, where he actually, there's somewhere online him talking about how he did it, how he managed to get this information or this emotion out of the person, which I just think it's
the guy doing the executions.
How he managed to kind of snap him out of his formal way of speaking and actually break down in tears. Just this a very simple but incredibly clever pointing of a squirrel, which people have to watch to understand. But I think that's that kind of storytelling, because he's a brilliant storyteller. Whether it's real or not, I think that's also the point of it, which often has been talked about, whether what's more real, documentary or fiction. There's an argument going that actually fiction's more real because documentary is artificial. But I think Herzog plays with both, and he gets at this at the ecstatic truth that he talks about, rather than the accountant's truth.
There's an ecstasy of truth, and I know what it is. Yes. Since I've got my health condition, myalgic encephalomyelitis, about 17 years ago, the thing I've missed the most, at least in the most instinctual way, is walking a long distance without being impacted by that process in terms of my physical functioning, my cognitive functioning. And partly for that reason, I really love Herzog's beautifully elegant little book, his first of the two books he has written about his walk from Munich to Paris to see Lotte Eisner, the filmmaker who he thought might be dying, and he walked to her over the course of about 3 weeks. And the book's just a diary of him taking that walk and breaking into houses to sleep over for the night, houses where the owners were away. And I'm a little bit subjective in the way I respond to that book because it's an activity I especially miss. But Herzog himself is a very big fan of his own writing. He thinks that it has a relative value vis-a-vis the filmmaking that's underestimated.
That's interesting, yeah. I think Svankmajer was thinking that as well.
That's, I think, not an unfair point to make, because I think what often happens with people like that is that film buffs write up the book reviews of the books Herzog writes. And so his books never get reviewed by literary people.
Yes.
And so something goes missing. Now he'd get a bit of zing actually if he got reviewed by literary people. It's some slightly Hemingway-ish things going on there. But the books have fallen into the hands of film critics and actually haven't known what to do with them. And I think that's part of the reason why he's not completely wrong. He's exaggerated a bit, but he's not completely wrong to say. You know, 30 years after I am dead, no one will watch my films, but they will read, and they will read my books.
Which I still have to read. I've got it done.
Yes, you were going to do a film festival with him, and it never, many years ago, and it never happened. I was also planning to do something with him, but I never got around to it. So so I've still never had a conversation with him, except this very brief exchange from which I'm quoting, where he told me that his books are better than his films. Yes, but it's frightening because he's in his mid-70s, man, maybe even late 70s now. Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, and same as Svankmajer. He's
older.
80 something, yeah.
So, I mean, look, final question. When are we coming out of this pandemic?
I hope soon, because all of this technology that we have to now use more is on one hand wonderful. I'm grateful, of course, but on the other hand, it's a very impoverished version of life. So I can't wait to be in the real world with real people.
And of course, it's a deep crime to drink good wine alone, which is why I'm not drinking. Which is why I'm not drinking good wine. I'm drinking a natural wine from the south of France. It's a blend of various grapes, but it's one of the downsides. Yes.
Yeah, that you can't share that glass actually properly.
Yes. Well, let's wish everybody who's watching this health, especially if their health isn't good, and I look forward to carrying on the conversation about film, and I'm always a very big fan of your career. Really big fan. So I'm expecting very nice things over the next decade. I can't wait to witness them.
It's been a pleasure talking.